The Candyman. Halloween night, October 31st, 1974. A thin fog clung to the streets of Pasadena, Texas, as children moved from door to door chasing sugar and excitement. The air was cold enough to demand coats. Ronald O'Brien walked beneath the streetlights wearing a rain slicker, accompanied by his two young children, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth, alongside their neighbor Jim Bates and his children. At one dimly lit house, the children knocked and waited. No one came. Restless, they darted ahead to the next stop, leaving O'Brien standing alone in the shadows. Minutes later, he rejoined the group, holding 5 oversized pixie sticks. He explained that the silent homeowner had finally opened the door and handed him the costly candy. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, Timothy asked for permission to eat a treat before going to sleep. His parents allowed it. He chose the pixie sticks. Almost instantly, Timothy said something was wrong. The taste was sharp, bitter. O'Brien urged him to drink Kool-Aid to wash it down. Moments passed, then pain struck violently. Timothy doubled over, ran to the bathroom, began vomiting, his body seizing uncontrollably. His father lifted him as his strength faded, rushing for help. But the journey ended in the ambulance. Timothy did not survive. Inside that candy was enough potassium cyanide to kill 3 grown adults. What followed was a slow unveiling of truth. O'Brien was drowning in debt, more than $100,000, and had drifted through 21 jobs in a decade. Only months before Halloween, he had quietly taken out $10,000 life insurance policies on both of his children. He had asked chemical suppliers about cyanide, about how much it would take to kill. The man who supposedly handed out the candy was proven innocent, working at an airport, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses. Investigators discovered the poisoned pixie sticks hidden inside O'Brien's raincoat sleeves. He had given them not only to his own children, but to 3 others, hoping chaos would mask intention. The jury needed just 46 minutes to see through the illusion. On March 31, 1984, Ronald O'Brien was executed by lethal injection. Timothy's death remains a chilling lesson. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears the face of trust. I understood that truth differently when I searched my own name and email online. Page after page appeared data broker sites displaying my private life as if it were public property. Old addresses, phone numbers, details about my family, all exposed. The feeling is unsettling, violating. These companies gather and sell personal information without permission, generating massive profits. Technically, they are required to remove your data if you ask, but the process is so exhausting and confusing that most people never finish it. That's where today's sponsor, Aura, steps in. Aura takes care of this for you. They remove your information from data broker sites and keep it from returning. I use Aura personally, and I recommend it to the people closest to me, because it's the only solution that genuinely makes me feel safe in the digital world. And Aura goes far beyond data removal. It monitors the dark web for your information, sends real-time alerts for suspicious activity on your bank and credit accounts, and includes a secure VPN, antivirus protection, a password manager, and round-the-clock support based in the US if the worst ever happens. Aura backs you with $5 million in identity theft insurance. It's infuriating that private lives are treated like merchandise. That's why I chose Aura. You can try it free for 14 days using the link in the description or the pinned comment. In just 2 weeks, you'll see how much of your personal information is already exposed. I wouldn't move through the online world without protection anymore, and neither should you. Thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video. The fake trick-or-treat. Halloween night, October 31st, 1957. In Sun Valley, California, the Fabiano household had already gone quiet. Peter Fabiano and his wife, Betty, were in bed when the doorbell cut through the silence. The clock had passed 11 p.m., an hour when costumes should be put away and candy bowls long empty. Still, Peter rose and went downstairs. From the bedroom, Betty heard his voice drift upward. "Isn't it a little late for this?" A flat reply came back. "No." Then, a sharp crack echoed through the house. Betty and her teenage daughter Judy ran toward the front door. Peter lay there, blood spreading across his chest from a gunshot wound. There was nothing anyone could do. He died within moments. The person responsible was dressed for Halloween, but not like a child. Blue jeans, a khaki jacket, red gloves, and a domino-style mask, its features crudely painted, transforming a human face into something hollow and unreal. The figure had raised a paper bag hiding a handgun fired once, then disappeared into a car waiting nearby. Peter Fabiano was no stranger to hard work or discipline. He was a Marine veteran and a successful owner of a beauty salon. When investigators asked Betty who might wish him harm, one name surfaced quickly: Joan Rabel. Joan had once worked at Peter's salon. Over time, she grew close to Betty. When the Fabianos' marriage began to fracture, Betty moved in with Joan. What began as support quietly crossed into romance. Eventually, Betty chose to return home, promising Peter she would sever all contact with Joan. Joan was left shattered. In her isolation, she formed a new bond with Goldine Pides, a recently divorced medical secretary. Over 4 years of shared coffee and conversations, Joan slowly rewrote reality for Goldie. She painted Peter as cruel, violent, and monstrous, a villain who deserved punishment. None of it was true. On September 21, 1957, Goldine bought a .38 caliber revolver. Weeks later, on Halloween night, the two women put on disguises and drove to the Fabiano house. They waited in darkness until every light went out. Then Goldine walked alone to the door. Joan stayed behind the wheel. One knock, one shot, one life ended. 2 weeks later, detectives traced the firearm back to Goldine. When confronted, she did not resist. She confessed almost immediately. The illusion collapsed. Both women ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Their sentences: 5 years to life in prison, a crime masked by costumes, a lie repeated until it felt like truth, and a reminder that deception, when nurtured long enough, can become deadly even without warning, even on a night meant for innocence. The Wrong Door Incident. On the evening of October 17, 1992, anticipation filled the air for 16-year-old Yoshihiro Hattori, alongside his American host brother, Webb Haymaker. He was preparing for a Halloween party in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Yoshi had arrived from Japan barely 2 months earlier, carrying curiosity, excitement, and a deep trust in the world around him. That night, he wore a white tuxedo, playfully echoing John Travolta's iconic look from Saturday Night Fever. Just after 8 p.m., the two teenagers arrived in the neighborhood where the party was supposed to be. Houses looked alike, decorations blurred together in the glow of porch lights and autumn shadows. By mistake, they walked up to the wrong home. They rang the doorbell. Nothing happened. Assuming they had the address wrong, they turned and headed back toward their car. Inside the house, Bonnie Pears noticed the costumed figures through a side entrance. Alarmed, she quickly locked the door and called out to her husband, her voice edged with fear. "Rodney, get your gun." Rodney Pears reached for a loaded .44 Magnum revolver. When he stepped out through the carport door, he saw the boys moving away. He raised the weapon and shouted a single command into the night: "Freeze!" Yoshi, hearing the voice and believing he had finally found the party, turned and walked back toward the house. He did not grasp the meaning of the word. He did not see the gun. Webb did. Panic flooded him as he screamed for his friend to stop. The shot rang out once. The bullet tore through both lobes of Yoshi's left lung. Within minutes, as sirens cut through the darkness, his life slipped away in the ambulance from massive blood loss. At first, police questioned Rodney Pears and released him, stating he had acted within the law, but the silence did not hold. After strong objections from Louisiana's governor and the Japanese consul, Pears was formally charged with manslaughter. In court, the defense argued that Yoshi's movements were so unusual that any reasonable person would have felt threatened. After just over 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of not guilty. Yoshi's parents sought justice in another way. In civil court, they prevailed, receiving $650,000 in damages, a single wrong door, a single misunderstood word, and a life extinguished not by malice, but by fear, reminding us that sometimes fate turns on moments so small, they feel invisible until it is too late. The Hayride Incident. On October 11, 2014, as autumn settled over Mechanic Falls, Maine, 17-year-old Cassidy Sherrod arrived at Harvest Hill Farm with a group of classmates, ready for an evening wrapped in laughter, costumes, and seasonal thrills. They had come for the gauntlet, a haunted hayride known for its screams, shadows, and harmless fear meant to fade with the night. Cassidy was no ordinary teenager. At Messalonskee High School, she stood at the very top of her class, ranked first out of 244 students, and shined on the varsity soccer field with equal dedication. That night was meant to be a break from responsibility, a moment to simply be young. The attraction relied on a 1979 Jeep CJ5, pulling a trailer packed with more than 20 riders, weaving through a corn maze under dim lights and artificial terror. As evening deepened, the Jeep began to roll downhill. Then control vanished. Without warning, the vehicle lurched, tipping violently. The Jeep and trailer overturned, hurling passengers into the air. Bodies struck the ground. Screams replaced laughter. Cassidy and her friends were thrown from the trailer with brutal force. Bones fractured, ankles twisted, skin tore. In total, 22 people were rushed to hospitals. Cassidy never made it. Her injuries were catastrophic. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation that followed exposed a truth far more frightening than any haunted attraction. The Jeep's rear brakes were completely non-functional. The front brakes barely worked. The vehicle had been hauling more than twice its safe towing capacity. The brake fluid reservoir was empty. Critical brake components were missing or installed incorrectly. None of this was a secret. Employees had repeatedly warned the farm's owner, Peter Bultdak, that the Jeep was dangerous, that it should be scrapped entirely. Those warnings were ignored. The vehicle went years without proper maintenance. In November 2016, Harvest Hill Farm pleaded guilty to a felony charge of aggravated driving to endanger. Cassidy's family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which was settled in 2017. From that loss emerged something lasting. The settlement funds were used to support the Shine on Cass Foundation, created in Cassidy's memory, a living reminder that even when joy turns to tragedy, light can still be carried forward. A night meant for fear that fades, a failure that never should have existed, and a young life lost not to chance, but to neglect, hidden in plain sight. The Costume Incident. On Halloween night, October 31, 2020, Old Quebec City felt unnaturally still. Pandemic restrictions had emptied streets that were usually alive with celebration. Around 10:30 p.m., uneasy calls began reaching authorities, reports of a man roaming near the Parliament building, dressed in what appeared to be medieval attire. He stood out, yet not enough to raise immediate alarm. Black jogging pants, heavy black leather boots, a short-sleeved kimono, a dark face mask. At first glance, many assumed it was simply another elaborate Halloween costume, eccentric perhaps, but harmless. Then the screams cut through the silence. The man was carrying a katana-style Japanese sword, its blade longer than 76 centimeters. Without warning, he began attacking people at random. The assaults unfolded across at least 4 different locations, including areas near the iconic Chateau Frontenac and along Dortwil and des Remparts streets. Witnesses later spoke of pure chaos, people scattered in every direction, unsure where safety lay. Amid the panic, lives were taken. Francois Duchesne, a 56-year-old museum employee, was killed. Suzanne Cleroux, a 61-year-old hairdresser, also lost her life. 5 others were wounded, some suffering severe injuries. There was no pattern, no selection, only chance. For more than 2.5 hours, police searched the city's narrow streets. Shortly before 1 a.m. they found the suspect. 24-year-old Carl Gerard was lying on the ground, barefoot, suffering from hypothermia. He surrendered without resistance. As the investigation deepened, disturbing details surfaced. 5 years earlier, in a medical setting, Gerard had spoken about a desire to commit a violent act. During his trial, he revealed that by the age of 18, he had imagined a plan centered on killing people with a sword and spreading terror. He described an internal split, 2 versions of himself, one of which he claimed took control on Halloween night. In May 2022, the court delivered its verdict. Carl Gerard was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. A city silenced by circumstance, a costume mistaken for fantasy, and a reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous masks are the ones no one questions until it is already too late. The egging murder. On October 31, 1998, Halloween moved quietly through the Bronx as 21-year-old Carl Jackson drove through the neighborhood with his girlfriend, Darlene, and her 9-year-old son, Clyde. Their plan was simple: pick Clyde up from a children's party, then head together to another celebration, a night meant for costumes, laughter, and small memories. Carl had only recently turned 21. He was reserved by nature, raised by hardworking parents, a mother who was a nurse and a father employed by the Postal Service. By day, Carl worked as a data entry clerk at Morgan Stanley, living a life that rarely drew attention. As their car rolled down the street, something struck the window, an egg. Then another. A group of teenagers nearby had begun pelting passing vehicles for amusement, turning mischief into provocation. Carl pulled the car over and stepped outside. Words were exchanged in the darkness. Voices sharpened. The tension grew heavier with each second. Sensing the situation spiraling beyond control, Carl turned away and got back into the passenger seat. That should have ended it. Instead, 17-year-old Curtis Sterling raised a gun. One shot shattered the night. The bullet struck Carl in the head. His life ended instantly over nothing at all. A future vanished in a moment of reckless impulse. Carl's father later spoke with quiet bitterness, saying that's what Halloween has gotten into. His mother, Gloria, carried the weight differently. It took us nearly 2 years just to speak about it, she said. We were destroyed. We never imagined someone in our family would be murdered, especially on a holiday, over something so senseless. Carl's death was not an isolated tragedy. Between 1984 and 2010, at least 24 people in New York City were seriously injured or killed in shootings, stabbings, beatings, or accidents tied to confrontations sparked by egg throwing during Halloween. Curtis Sterling was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Every Halloween, Carl Jackson's mother sends Sterling a card. In it, she tells him she was grateful he was behind bars, though he was released in December 2015. A harmless prank, a single choice, and a reminder that even the smallest acts, when fed by anger and fear, can echo forever through the lives of those left behind. Napa Halloween Incident. On Halloween night, October 31, 2004, a quiet house on Dorset Street in Napa, California glowed with porch lights and laughter. 3 roommates spent the evening welcoming trick-or-treaters, handing out candy as costumed children came and went. Leslie Mazzara, 26, a former beauty queen from South Carolina, Adrienne Insonia, also 26, a civil engineer, and 27-year-old Lauren Manser, a volleyball coach. The night felt ordinary, safe, light-hearted. By 11 p.m., the streets had emptied, candy bowls were set aside. The house settled into stillness as all 3 women went to sleep. Leslie and Adrienne retired to their bedrooms upstairs. Lauren's room was downstairs, closer to the back of the house. Just after 2 a.m., that calm fractured. Lauren jolted awake to the sharp sound of shattering glass. Seconds later, screams tore through the house from above, raw, terrifying, unmistakable. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps, crashing through rooms, pounding toward the staircase. Frozen with fear, Lauren listened as the footsteps descended, growing closer with every second. Instinct took over. She ran through the back door and crouched in the yard, holding her breath, willing herself to stay invisible. From the darkness, she heard someone climbing out through a basement window, then running, disappearing into the night. After what felt like forever, Lauren forced herself back inside. Upstairs, the truth waited. Leslie was face down on the floor, surrounded by blood so deep it pooled beneath her. Adrian lay near the back of the bed, barely clinging to life, bleeding profusely. Panicked, Lauren slipped in the blood as she tried to escape and called for help. Both women had been stabbed repeatedly. By the time police arrived, Leslie and Adrienne were gone. The investigation would eventually uncover the killer, 26-year-old Eric Koppel. He was engaged to Lily Prudhomme, a close friend of Adrienne's, and had previously attended the housewarming party when the women first moved in. DNA recovered from the crime scene tied him directly to the murders. Eric Koppel was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. A house once filled with laughter, a night meant for harmless rituals, and a reminder that sometimes terror does not come from the outside world but slips quietly through a door already known. The Cold Case. On the evening of October 30th, 1975 mischief night, 15-year-old Martha Moxley stepped out of her home in the Bellhaven neighborhood of Greenwich, Connecticut. It was the night before Halloween, a time when local teenagers traditionally roamed the streets, ringing doorbells, laughing, and pulling harmless pranks like draping houses in toilet paper. Martha had every reason to feel alive that night. Having moved from California just over a year earlier, she had quickly become well-liked and deeply woven into the social world of her new town. She was eager to spend the evening with friends, unaware that it would be her last. She crossed the street to the Skakel home, where other teens had gathered. Witnesses later recalled Martha flirting with 17-year-old Thomas Skakel. At some point, the two shared a kiss. Around 9:30 p.m. they were seen together behind a fence near the backyard pool, their figures partially hidden by the dark. After that moment, Martha slipped out of sight. She never returned home. By the morning of October 31st, Halloween Day concern turned to fear. Martha's mother realized her daughter was missing. A search began that afternoon. It ended just steps from where it started. Martha's body was discovered beneath a tree in her own backyard. Nearby lay fragments of a shattered 6-iron golf club. The autopsy revealed a brutal truth. Martha had been beaten and stabbed repeatedly with the club. Investigators traced the weapon back to the Skakel residence. The case exploded into international attention, not only for its violence but for its connections. The Skakel children were relatives of Ethel Skakel Kennedy, the widow of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Yet despite the scrutiny, years passed without charges. Decades followed in silence. Then, in 2000, the stillness broke. Michael Skakel, 15 years old at the time of Martha's death, was arrested at age 41. In 2002, he was convicted and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. But the story did not end there. In 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court overturned the conviction. On October 30, 2020, exactly 45 years after Martha Moxley was killed, the state announced it would not pursue a retrial, and so the case closed without closure. A life taken on the edge of childhood, evidence scattered across time, and a truth that never fully surfaced, leaving the murder of Martha Moxley officially, and forever, unsolved. Taylor Van Dist. On Halloween night, October 31, 2011, the town of Armstrong, British Columbia felt alive with anticipation. 18-year-old Taylor Van Dyke stepped out of her home dressed as a zombie, smiling at the thought of one final night of trick-or-treating before adulthood officially closed that chapter. It was meant to be a goodbye to childhood rituals. Taylor was deeply known in her small community. A 2011 graduate of Pleasant Valley Secondary School, she excelled academically, stood out in athletics, and devoted countless hours to volunteering. To many, she wasn't just admired, she was loved. As evening settled around 6 p.m., Taylor began walking toward a friend's house, following a stretch of railroad tracks. It was a familiar route, short and well-traveled, one she had taken many times before without fear. Along the way, she exchanged text messages with her friend. The conversation was ordinary, light, casual, full of the small talk of teenage life. Then everything changed. At 6:01 p.m., Taylor sent one final message. She wrote that she felt someone was following her, that she was scared. There were no more texts after that. When Taylor failed to arrive, concern quickly turned into panic. Her friend called again and again, but there was no response. Almost immediately, friends, family members, and police began searching the area, spreading out along the tracks and nearby roads. 2 hours later, they found her. Taylor was lying along a quiet section of the railway, severely injured and barely alive. She was rushed to Vernon Jubilee Hospital, but her injuries were too extensive. The following morning, Taylor died. The attack had been brutal. She had been strangled and repeatedly struck with a heavy flashlight. The trauma to her head proved fatal. In a final act of resistance, Taylor had fought back. DNA, recovered from beneath her fingernails, would later identify her killer. The evidence led investigators to 28-year-old Matthew Forster from Cherryville. During questioning, police asked him directly if he felt remorse for killing Taylor. He answered yes. Forster admitted to beating her multiple times with a flashlight and leaving her along the tracks. In 2018, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a life sentence, with no chance of parole, for 17 years. Taylor and her family had never seen him before that night. A final walk, a single message of fear, and a life taken by a stranger, leaving behind a community forever marked by the silence that followed her last words. Christopher Jenkins. On Halloween night, October 31, 2002, 21-year-old Christopher Jenkins left his apartment in Minneapolis dressed in a Native American costume. Christopher Jenkins. He was excited for a night of Halloween bar hopping with his girlfriend and another couple. Jenkins was a University of Minnesota business senior, captain of the school's lacrosse team, smart, popular, and well-liked. It was supposed to be a fun night. The group went to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in downtown Minneapolis. Around midnight, Jenkins was kicked out of the bar for being too intoxicated. He left behind his phone, wallet, and jacket. The bouncer watched him take a left on Hennepin Avenue and disappear into the cold Halloween night. That was the last time anyone saw Christopher Jenkins alive. When Jenkins didn't return home, family and friends immediately became worried. They worked with police to search for him. On 2 separate occasions, bloodhounds tracked his scent from a pizza shop across from the bar to a parking garage. Drops of blood were found in the garage, but his scent ended there. Then the trail went cold. 4 months later, on February 27, 2003, a worker spotted something in the Mississippi River. Jenkins's body was found floating on its back, between the 3rd Avenue Bridge and St. Anthony Falls, still wearing his Halloween costume. His oversized shoes were still on. His shirt was still tucked into his pants. His arms were folded across his chest. He had human hair clenched in his left hand. GHB, a common drug used to incapacitate victims, was found in his system. Police initially ruled it accidental drowning, but later reclassified it as homicide after receiving information from a jailed witness. In 2018, prosecutors said the case was not chargeable. The murder remains unsolved. The zombie bus incident. On October 10, 2014, 18-year-old Jeremy McPadden arrived at a sprawling corn maze in Hauser, Idaho, ready for his very first shift. It was opening night for him, and his nerves mixed with excitement. One of the main attractions was a zombie slayer paintball bus. Guests rode through the maze on a modified school bus, firing paintball guns mounted along the windows at actors dressed as zombies. Jeremy, a tall athletic senior at West Valley High School, had been hired to play one of those zombies. Friends and cousins had already been working there for weeks, assuring him the job was simple, fun, and easy cash. That night, he was eager to prove himself. Around 10:30 p.m., Jeremy took his position in the cornfield. His role was straightforward: burst out from the stalks, charge the bus, and give riders a scare as they peppered him with paintballs. As the bus crept forward through the uneven maze, Jeremy ran from his hiding spot toward the back of the vehicle, fully committed to the act. Then something went wrong. Jeremy lost his footing. Witnesses later said they saw him stumble and fall forward, landing directly in the path of the rear passenger side wheels. Before anyone could react, the bus rolled over him. Inside the vehicle, no one realized what had happened. The cornfield terrain caused the bus to rock and jolt constantly, and many passengers assumed the rough movement and even Jeremy's fall was part of the experience. The bus continued on, pulling farther away from where he lay. It wasn't until the actors began resetting for the next run that the truth became clear. Jeremy McPadden was dead at the scene. His aunt later explained that the teens working the attraction were paid $50 per night. This was Jeremy's very first shift. In a haunting detail, his cousin had slipped beneath the bus just nights earlier but escaped without injury. That warning went unheeded. No criminal charges were ever filed. The Zombie Slayer bus attraction was shut down. A job meant to be harmless fun. A role built on pretending to die. And a reminder that sometimes the line between performance and tragedy vanishes without warning, leaving silence where screams were once meant to be.